I think the tunnels is a very interesting story in the sense that here comes Israel and once again shows its intelligence dominance, its ability to know exactly what's going on in places where nobody would expect it to know what's happening. Just like with the trove of the documents that comprise the nuclear archive of Iran, bringing them from Tehran. Just like here, finding all these tunnels, already 4 tunnels were discovered in the depths of the mountain. It's unbelievable. And it tells everybody around that they should take us seriously. Now, with doing that, we not only expose the tunnels themselves and deprived Hizbullah and Iran from one of the jewels of their crown in fighting against Israel in the future the way they planned it, but we also expose the fact that actually Hizbullah operates under Iranian dictate instead of being committed to its Lebanese identity. And actually Hizbullah puts, for the sake of Iran, puts the entire Lebanon in danger to serve Iran's interests. And this is something that's very important, and we should now, as we try at this point, convince the international community to do 2 things. First of all, condemn Hizbullah and Iran and Lebanon for letting this happen. And this is something that has not yet been done. And secondly, declare or designate Hizbullah as a terror organization, because until now, with the exception of the United States and the Arab countries, the Europeans and the UN have not decided to look at Hizbullah as a terror organization. Now, with everything that they've done now, it's so clear that they are, and all this idea of separating between the political wing and the military wing, do you think that a couple of operatives of Hizbullah didn't have what to do in the evening, so they dig the tunnel into Israel? That's obviously something that was decided upon in Iran and executed by Hizbullah, and something has to be done about it. The international community has to come to grip with it.
Yeah?
I agree completely, and I would add one element. I think that Lebanon ought to be described as illegally occupied territory. Lebanon has been occupied by Iran, and Lebanon no longer really has sovereignty. There is an occupier, and the occupier is Iran. They occupy through Hezbollah. And I would like to see UN resolutions. I'd like to see campaigns directed to freeing Lebanon from its occupation. Now, some Lebanese might say we're doing it willingly. That's nonsense. When you have an army like Hezbollah controlling the south of Lebanon and really controlling in many ways the government of Lebanon, it is fully occupied territory. You know, it's interesting. The radical haters of Israel call Gaza still occupied by Israel because Israel exercises some control over the ports and over the airspace. It's nonsense. Gaza could have been the Singapore of the Mediterranean had it not overthrown the Palestinian Authority and instituted Hamas and rockets and terror tunnels. But Lebanon is a fully occupied country by Iran today, and the international community ought to recognize that. The other point is the general mentioned that Europe doesn't regard Hezbollah as necessarily a terrorist organization. You get people, however, like Jeremy Corbyn, who goes much further. He admires Hezbollah. He supports Hezbollah. He welcomes Hezbollah into the international community. He treats it with respect, and he may be the next prime minister of Great Britain. What a tragedy that would be. Hezbollah must be singled out as not only a terrorist organization, but an occupying force on behalf of the Iranian government.
Well, our next topic is the payment to terrorists by the Palestinian Authority. Now, Cooper, you've written extensively and briefed top officials both here in Israel and in the U.S. What is at stake here? And both from the Israeli perspective and from the American perspective, are we both doing enough?
The amount of money they spend on paying salaries to terrorists and for the families of deceased terrorists is 7% of their budget. Is 1.27 billion shekels, like $335 million a year. It's 7% of the budget. It's about 45% of the foreign aid they get. So every penny they get from the international community, 45% of it go to pay salaries to terrorists. That's something that, of course, is in total breach of their commitments under the Oslo Agreement. They were supposed to fight terrorism. Instead, they incite for terror. And as a matter of fact, this is a situation where they actually solicit terror. because they promised this aid in advance. Anybody who goes to carry out an attack, he knows that he's going to get this money. And we have a lot of testimonies from terrorists to say that was one of our considerations. When the special envoy of the United States government, Jason Greenblatt, actually tweeted asking the Palestinian Authority, you have to decide whether you want to be a political entity or a terror organization. And as long as you decide that you want to pay the salaries to the terrorists, we understand what your decision is. So, and the funny thing is that Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, repeatedly say, even if I have only 1 penny, I'm going to continue using it to pay the salaries to the terrorists. So finally, the United States has adopted the Taylor Force Act, and they have stopped paying or giving aid to the Palestinian Authority budget. And Israel has adopted what is called the Stern Law, after member of Knesset Elazar Stern, that says that beginning this coming January, next month, Israel is going to deduct from the money it collects and delivers to the Palestinian Authority the 1/12 of the money that the Palestinians paid to terrorists in 2018. So this, for the first time, the Palestinians understand that there is a price for this policy. Now we want to see more people joining in order to send this message to the Palestinians. Now I want to say one word about it, about the importance of this. The entire situation that we are fighting now is about the attempt to convince the Palestinians to change their strange, fraudulent narrative that paying salaries to terrorists is part of it, this idea that terrorists are heroes. And this effort, the international community has to join forces in order to convince the Palestinians to change this narrative. The Americans did a big and important step in this direction. Israel is finally doing some steps. But the messages coming from Europe are not helpful. And we have to see a change over there too.
Alan?
What I've done when I've advocated stopping payments to the Palestinians for paying terrorists is I make an analogy to the mafia or other criminal organizations. If the head of the mafia had said, look, anybody who kills my rival, I will pay him a certain amount per month, that person would be guilty of accessory to murder. That person would go to jail. The person who offered the bounty would go to jail. And it is criminal for any individual or any group to offer a reward to a criminal, to offer a reward to a terrorist. And the European community should recognize that they are encouraging criminal conduct, terrorist conduct. You know, today the victims are a Jewish pregnant woman on the West Bank. Tomorrow the victims can be people in the middle of Paris and the middle of London and the middle of Rome. Of course, we've seen that. And so the idea of anyone in the international community encouraging terrorism by offering to pay the terrorists a bounty, it's going to come to a theater near you because inevitably, when terrorism is rewarded, it spreads. Many years ago, I wrote a book called Why Terrorism Works. And the thesis of my book is terrorism works because it's rewarded. This is many years ago. Benjamin Netanyahu wrote a similar book talking about how terrorism has been effective because the international community has refused to sufficiently condemn it. So I think that this is a very, very important issue. And I'm proud of the fact that finally in the United States, we're coming to grips with the support we as Americans provide indirectly to terrorism when we pay the Palestinians money that they use to then encourage terrorism.
Well, the next thing I'd like to ask you, Alan, and you, Yossi, about is the recent Qatar forum, which was held in Doha, in which Iranian Foreign Minister Zarif reportedly bragged about supposedly sidestepping American sanctions. Yossi, what's your take on this? And Alan, what needs to be done?
Well, first of all, I think that it's shameful for the Iranians to brag about that. The real issue is that they are not that successful. That's the truth, and that the current sanctions that were reimposed by the United States over Iran are working, and there are a lot of difficulties. And the fact is that a year after this unrest in Iran started, it still goes on. And with the new sanctions, it's going to be more and more difficult for the Iranians to manage the public. And the public is losing gradually the fear from the government, because everybody understands that this regime leads Iran nowhere. So that's what Zarif should really worry about. Now, of course, he's trying to create a different impression, but this impression is wrong. And the truth is that Whereas until 6 months ago, the feeling in Iran was that they may somehow manage to keep this safe way to an arsenal of nuclear weapons through the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. Now they understand it's going to be extremely difficult, because even the coming years are going to be difficult. So of course, right now they're trying to see if this policy is going to last beyond 2020.
Alan, can I get your take on this? What needs to be done?
Look, I think no American administration has done so much harm in so short a period of time as the last years of the Obama administration. I'm embarrassed to say I voted for Obama both times. I'm proud to have voted for him the first time, but I regret voting for him the second time, because enacting the deal with Iran, which was a one-way deal and which continues to have negative effects today, was a disaster for the United States, for Israel, and I think for world peace. And second, of course, the Obama's administration refused to veto the UN resolution regarding Jerusalem that declared the Kotel and the Hebrew University and Hadassah access roads in the Jewish quarter to be illegally occupied territory, was a disaster as well. And President Trump, who I voted against, has been trying to undo both of those disasters. First, the Iranian deal by getting out of it from the United States, and second, by recognizing Jerusalem and moving our embassy there, returning to the status quo that the Obama administration undid through its benighted failure to veto the resolution. So I think Americans, though, in general, regardless of who's elected in 2020, I think Americans generally think that the Iran deal was a mistake. Right. And I think we also think, on balance, that the Jerusalem embassy move was a good thing. So I think focusing on the 2020 election is a mistake for the Iranians. We have to be careful, because the Iranians might try to do what the Russians try to do, namely influence the elections. You know, with the internet and technology today, it is possible for foreign countries, and Iran is very sophisticated in a high-tech way, as is North Korea. So we have to be careful about influences on our elections, and I'm not making any decisions now about the 2020 election, but I don't think the 2020 election will have a big impact on American sanctions regarding Iran.
So, Yossi, we only have time for a quick question here, so I want you to take a look at one of the most high-profile cases in the war against BDS. That's the boycott by Airbnb against Israeli clients in the occupied territories who live over the Green Line across the 1967 border with Jordan. Well, can I make my reservations yet, or should I stick to hotels for the time being? What's going on?
I think it's another example of how good intentions may lead you to hell. And I'm sure that Airbnb is not, as they say, they oppose the BDS and so on and so forth, but what have they done? It's crazy. They singled out Israel and a part of Israel as the victim of their activities. Only Israel and Nazis are sanctioned by Airbnb. It's so crazy. And they don't understand what is really the purpose of the BDS. The BDS is against the existence of the state of Israel. That's what they're trying to do. They try to hide it in nice words, but actually what they mean is to bring the existence of the state of the Jewish people to an end.